Well, let's get started. Got a lot to talk about today on the Well.
Welcome to the Well. On this morning, we got Sister Brianna, Brother David, Elder Charles, and a special guest, Sister Precious Williams. How you feeling on the day?
I am all right.
Give us a little something about yourself.
I don't know. Let's see. What do you want to know? I am a black woman in America.
Oh. Are there any...
Started out fine.
She came out.
Yeah.
Speaking on that route and going that route on today, we're going to talk about American politics. Since you're a black woman in America,
Yes.
and one thing we talk about, we have a new president, Donald Trump, and a lot of black people do not agree with that. And then also in that, a lot of black people did not come out to vote and different other things. Well, what do you stand on these issues?
Well, I will say that the election of Donald Trump, I would not necessarily blame the black community. The people that did vote, of course, there were numbers of people that didn't, but those of us who did vote, majority did not vote for Donald Trump. I cannot say the same about my other fellow Americans. So from that perspective, when I look at what's happening, I wouldn't say it's an indictment against the black community. In terms of Donald Trump's presidency overall, if I had to grade him, it would be an F as of right now. And I say that only because I feel like his current temperament and his position really does not speak to all of America. It's one thing to campaign in a particular way to a particular group of people, but if you say that you are the president of the United States of America, then it needs to encompass all people. When I consider his budget, and I look at the elements of the budget that he's cutting, when I consider healthcare and the way he wants to reform healthcare, when I consider his education initiatives, it lets me know that his drive and his determination is not speaking for all of America. I would even go as far as to say most of America, and that he caters predominantly to the 1% or the group of people that he considered the swamp, that he was not going to affiliate or associate with. So that is why when I look at his presidency, I don't see the good that was suggested that was going to come out of this. I'm not looking forward to the remainder of his 3 and a little more than a half year of his term. And then in addition, when I consider all these issues of Russiagate and Collusiongate and everybody in his cabinet, I just feel like it's just a really big distraction to what needs to be done, but it's also an imperative of the type of campaign that he ran, and I personally think the type of person that he is. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Yo, can I jump in there?
Yeah.
I think on top of what you said about Trump, I don't think any of his intentions about being president had anything to do with the United States. Everything that these people have been doing has been geared at trying to undermine Obama because they didn't like him. They had something against black people, and we just need to say what it is. Black people have been saying what it is for a while, but there's a lot of people that are out here operating in ignorance. They keep denying the fact that it is racist. It is, misogynist, like everything. It's just negative. His campaign has been to undermine everything that Obama did. That's point blank, period.
So where I come from is a point of view of, we're the Well. We're coming from you live from Los Angeles. And so my thing is, in the church, you're taught to have hope and give someone a chance. God gave us all sitting at this table a chance and an opportunity when we got certain positions and got certain places and went to things like people were like, hey, I don't agree, she shouldn't be here, he shouldn't be there. But there was someone that said, hey, give him a chance. And when Donald Trump was first elected, there were certain people saying, hey, give him a chance. And when certain black people said, give him a chance, they were just beat down and called Uncle Toms and all different things like that. So where do you stand in the spiritual contents of, hey, at the end of the day, God is in control of everything. And he has a plan. And so let him see his plan through, or just, hey, this man is just the devil reincarnated walking this earth.
Well, I think that it is important to consider that God is the one that has the final say, but at the same time, Donald Trump really is, he's doing a lot of things that are, very questionable, as a few of my peers have made very clear. He is, a lot of his relations with other countries, I think he's just, his tone can be a bit, he can be very disrespectful with some of the things that he says, and I think that's something that should be addressed.
All right.
Well, when I was listening to what was being said, I do not believe that everyone who voted for Donald Trump was a racist, but I do believe every racist voted for Donald Trump. So not to label a blast at everyone who did that, there was a certain level of anger and frustration that was so intense, and it was real, and the anger had to be respected and acknowledged that Donald Trump, candidate Trump at that time, was able to personify and articulate it so succinctly. Well, and it might not have been the best way, but people jumped on that boat because they were like, this is a guy that's saying the right things. He's gonna kick the right behinds when he gets up in there. And, but being in office is a completely different matter than running for office. And I do believe now he has to come to grips, and he is coming to grips with everything that goes along with that. I pray for him as I would pray for any leader that has found themselves in a situation that is much bigger than they thought that it would be. I don't pray for him like, Lord, touch Donald Trump, give him your wisdom, make sure he does, because, President Trump is who he is, and we all have our free will. But I pray for us as a people, for us as a nation, that God would have mercy on us and that we would be able to turn towards God. I do believe that we do ourselves as a nation a grave disservice when we look to a leader or someone to make things better. So when he came out during this campaign, I alone can do this and I alone can do that, my heart kind of shuddered and broke a little bit, because no one leader is going to come in and do that. And as long as we ourselves believe that, white, black, Republican, or Democrat, we're in for a very rude awakening.
I want to say this to your point, though, this idea of hope from a church perspective. The Bible says that we will know a tree by the fruit that it bears. I think it's important to really pay attention to what the last 100 days of his presidency have meant for Americans. The 100 days is really a measurement of kind of taking into consideration what the president seeks to do. Within that first 100 days is when the budget is made. Within that first 100 days is when the cabinet picks are made, and you get a pretty good glimpse of what the agenda is. When I consider the first 100 days, the fruit on the tree doesn't look good to me. It's rotten. So from that perspective, then I make determinations of what I believe this presidency is. Now, because I'm a member of the church, it is my job to begin to call out and critique where we are going. And I say that because Dr. King, in his letter from the Birmingham jail, he makes mention of Christians and specifically white churches. And he says that he took great issue with the fact that he felt like they would stand with him in his pursuit for civil rights, and when they didn't, it was like a slap in the face, for paraphrasing. When he considered the beloved community, he began to say that it is the role of the church to be the conscience of a country. We are not supposed to be used, nor are we supposed to be tools, but we are rather supposed to push the agenda of justice. When you consider the prophets, when you consider the things that the prophets said, from Amos to Ezekiel, they all called out the priests. They all called out people who were in governing positions, the princes, the kings, when justice, like Amos said in chapter 5, needs to roll down like a river. Okay, the reason why justice needs to roll down like a river, number one, is because it comes from the top down. Okay, number two, because it needs to flow so that all can freely drink
Everybody
it.
gets
Okay, so that when I consider what's about to happen in light of the 100 days, Donald Trump has set up an agenda, and you see people like Jeff Sessions who are not interested in justice for police brutality, who are rolling back some of the probes into some of these
Shooting.
yeah, some of the shootings, as well as some of the investigations of a lot of the officers, rolling those things back. This proposal to build more private prisons, I know exactly where we're going. Like, you don't need a roadmap after that.
So then how can we prepare ourselves for what lies ahead? I mean, we know that Donald Trump is here. We know that, he isn't going anywhere. He's the president-elect. And, some of the things that he has done, he has, he has kept a lot of the promises that he made, one of which was, initiating the ban on the Saudi coming
Middle
to
East,
the
yes,
Middle
Middle East,
Eastern ban.
yeah, the other
But see, Saudi Arabia was
He's doing a lot
not.
of
Saudi
different
Arabia was not on that
He's in
list.
Saudi
the thing.
Arabia right now.
So
He's
see,
doing
this
business
is
there,
my
too.
issue,
Yeah.
right? So there's these countries that he's placed on the list,
Right.
that are Muslim majority countries, right? Now he spent his entire campaign saying that anti-Muslim, but now he wants to say that this ban is not anti-Muslim. The countries that have done
Radical.
right, the countries that have done some of the worst terrorists, or have people rather, people from the countries that have done some of the worst acts of terrorism
They're not on that
in the
list.
world are not on that list. Okay, and Saudi Arabia is not on that list. So then I have to say, what is the goal of the list? If it's to
Exactly.
keep out certain people,
really
so,
makes you
yeah.
wonder,
So
yes.
then I'm always conflicted because Donald Trump says things, they sound good,
Right.
but then when he goes to implement things, they don't even line up with the things that he said.
Exactly.
So
They're irrational. They're not well thought out, and they're very impulsive.
So
what he
I'll
does.
ask this, 'cause it seems like we are kind of
'Cause I-
bashing and beating down Donald and the man. I know we don't mean to do that, but my thing is more on the end of there were millions of people that actually voted for him. And so my thing is, as someone, I traveled to Lansing, Michigan last year, Kentucky, different areas of the country where they voted for them, and in Lansing, Michigan, they don't have anything anymore. They're down to the pits. They got tires in front of them. The shops are closed. Don't have jobs. So you had people that said, okay, for once, there's someone that is saying what I'm saying,
Yeah.
and I'm going to vote for that. So I just feel sometimes we just kind of say, okay, to hell with those people. I believe this, and this, and this is wrong, instead of saying, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, one thing I was taught and I live by is that God has a plan. He has a plan for me, you, each and every one of us at this table. And so at the end of the day, God, let your will be done. But I understand where Precious comes from and say, okay, at the same time, some of us need to stand up. And so I'm going to, as I shift to my next question, which is at the end of the day, where are the black leaders at? Where are they at?
I'm
Because
glad you
one thing
asked.
we come in the black
I'm glad
community,
you
we
asked.
say at the end of the day, one thing I was taught, the church led movements. The church, people don't want to go to church anymore. People don't respect pastors anymore, leaders anymore. Where are the black leaders? Instead of us posting and talking privately, kind of like we're doing on the well, what can we do to change things, and where are they at, and where are they at talking about
I am very glad that you asked that question. 2008, Democratic National Convention, Bishop Blake has an interview right before he speaks at the convention. He says African Americans are in a very precarious situation in that we have two identities. He said, with our morals, we are conservatives. We believe in family, we believe in a definite family structure. Historically, we have believed in traditional definitions of marriage. He says, with our politics and with our policies, however, we are more progressive. We do believe that there should be some type of government intervention and regulation. We remember when the federal marshals had to march little black kids into the elementary schools and the colleges because the states during those times were not going to let that happen. However, we do not necessarily agree with the wholesale issue regarding abortion rights that the progressive or the left has agreed with, nor with some of the newer definitions of marriage and relationship that they've been coming out with. However, we agree with our Republican brothers who say, yes, life is right. Life is precious, all life. There should be a certain amount of sanctity. But we disagree with the fact that after you're born, they don't care anything about you. It's a nice little prison they're building for you. So we fall down on both sides. I think that as we're able to identify and articulate our agenda as African Americans and stand to that, we won't necessarily need, quote, leaders. Leaders can be shot down. Leaders can be invalidated. They can make bad decisions, but agendas cannot be shot down. As soon as you knock one aspect of it down, 3 more people stand up and take its place. My Jewish American brothers have a clear, distinct agenda. Everyone else, every other ethnic group has a clear, distinct agenda. We don't even know who the leaders of these different groups are.
Even ISIS has
Right,
an agenda.
but we
So-
recognize their agenda.
I
But is it-
definitely think that if we as African Americans want to, be the leaders, we first of all we need to start by, taking the steps that are necessary to put ourselves in places of power. So, you really want to affect change, then we need to become, there's this quote I read somewhere, we need to become the doctors, the lawyers, the professors, but we're not present in those conversations. So we can't. First of all, we need to be able to get in these boardrooms and get in these meetings and with the UC presidents and the higher ups, because if we can't even get in those meetings, then we don't have a say so.
Yeah, there's
So
a
that's the
divide in our
unfortunate truth.
community too.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of the leaders in the past may have come from the church. There's a lot of distrust of the church. There's a lot of people that don't go to the church anymore. And then people that are in the church may not necessarily, if somebody's a leadership outside of it, they may be like, well, where's the church in what you're saying? So it may not be as much there. So there's a lot of that going on. I also think too, like you said something earlier about God's will. I don't think it's God's will that Donald Trump is the president doing everything he's doing, but I think he allows things to happen.
Yes.
Herod was there in the Bible, Abraham, all these kings that were really bad, but good things came out of the situation in the end. So obviously we're in the middle of it, but he may have had to allow Donald Trump for so many people to actually see there's an issue. If Clinton, like I rode in an Uber with somebody and this woman was like talking to me, just talking to me, a white woman about, man, can you believe this? And like she was so shocked and she was so scared. And me personally, because of my faith in God, I'm not really scared at all. I wasn't really shocked. And then I'm a black man. I was arrested on my campus, or handcuffed and put in a car because there were 4 of us coming out of a 7-Eleven. This has been going on since I was little. So I'm not shocked by any of this.
Right.
But for somebody like that, now the conversations are starting. So maybe if Clinton's elected, a lot of people are going on another day like, oh, it's okay, nothing's wrong. But there's a lot of other people that are having conversations now. We need to put action behind the conversation. But I think God will allow some things because it's like, look, I'm gonna let y'all go to this extreme. Finally, y'all gonna come back to me.
Right.
Gotcha.
If we didn't have a lot of problems in our lives, many of us wouldn't even be praying.
So I'll ask this and I'll direct this to Precious, kind of like feeding off what Brianna just said and kind of everyone kind of fed on. How do we go about as black people educating ourselves to deal with these issues correctly and it not be just a meme? We can make a meme, but how do we step out and make a difference in ways that we're supposed to?
Well, I think the first issue is that Black America, for the most part, have entered into a state of catharsis, okay? And so we can talk about these issues, but for the most part, many of us have said, well, this is how things are, I'm kind of used to it, there's really not much we can do about it. And then for other people who have kind of made their way to certain, they are the doctors, the lawyers, they're not really thinking about things that are kind of happening because we don't talk about them. Now, from that perspective, I will say this, and this has been a critique of mine of just the church overall, all churches, all denominations, all churches. The reason why the civil rights movement was able to take place, in part, was because Martin Luther King, as a young man, in terms of everything that was happening, decided to pick up a mantle. Now, here's the thing. If the church is the body, young adults are its legs.
Amen.
I have always said that. If the church is the body, young adults are its legs.
Amen.
At some level, you have to be willing to trust the young adults to lead the way. So when you consider the age of Martin at the time that he began his leadership, that made a difference because his ear was to the ground, his feet were to the ground, and he knew exactly what was happening, even when other people didn't. It's part of the reason why him and his dad got into huge conflicts about him leading, because his dad felt like, well, this is not necessary for us to go about it this way, but there was a certain level of comfort that his dad had entered into in his age, in his position, that Martin did not. Okay, so that's number one. So in light of that, I think that we need to really turn up the knob on the way we deliver messages in the pulpit. We need to become very conscious of the way that we talk about issues of social justice, of issues of economic equity, of issues of race in this country, because that is the foundation of most of the issues that we have. We need to turn up the knob on the way we have these discussions in our church settings, because people listen in our church settings. They're inclined to move when they leave church, and some of them just need to flat out know that we are in a state of crisis, that they are not considering. The second thing that I'll say to that is that, after you've had the discussion, for the sake of it not turning into a meme, I think that we also have to start getting the backing of, certain leaders, whether they be athletes, actors, people who are prominent. Now, I say that because most of the stuff that Martin was able to get done, he had Harry Belafonte, he had all of these different people there funding financially, as well as being the kind of vocal face in some of the other places that he couldn't get to. Now, for me, when I start to think about the way that worked, it means it was strategic. So that's part of the problem that we're having, is that we are not being strategic in the way that we figure out how to go about this. Now, I'm not saying that we need to resurrect the way they did the civil rights movement, because of course it's 2017, things are different, times have changed. But at some point, we're gonna have to get together and figure out strategically how we are going to go about bringing our issues to the table. And that might even mean collaborating with our white brothers and sisters in rural communities like the community in Michigan that you're talking about, and saying, hey, our issues are no different than your issues. If we can get rid of this race issue, then we can come together and figure out how to move the needle in America.
You know what? She just spoke on an issue to where Martin had, Dr. King had just moved to just prior to his death. He had dealt with the issue with the garbage men in Memphis, and he was on his way, I was told, to Pittsburgh, to where he was going to deal with the steel workers' rights and the steel workers union, not black steel workers, but all the steel workers. And then you see the beginnings of a coalition between an interracial coalition. Dr. Parsons, Karen Parsons in the New Jim Crow, talked about the 1600s, a time before racism was such a large part of the landscape of America, where the poor blacks and poor whites were all together, and it was the planter elite that they were really leveling, their angst at. And the planter elite said, listen, if we don't separate these guys right here, we're going to lose our shirt. So that's where you really see a lot of aspects coming into that. Regarding the agenda piece or the leaders, right now Bishop Blake instituted the urban initiatives, and there are 5 different issues that deal with education, crime, family life, financial literacy, and things of that nature. Right there you have the beginning of an issue. If the church and we continue getting busy in these areas affecting our community, then we can call in some of the culture makers, some of the more known African Americans to not get back behind a leader, but get behind an agenda.
I have a question though too. So I know we say we can, obviously we can integrate and try to talk to have these conversations with them. If Donald Trump were to say, you know what, I'll come on the well and come talk with us,
I think that
my first reaction would be like, no, I don't want to talk to him. But would that do any help? I think, but that's exactly. Like I would want to talk to him, but it's one of those things where it's like, I think that's how our overall perception is with us. It's like, in order to make progress, we have to have that conversation. But then, if they extend the hand,
if we can clearly state our agenda.
And
if someone's like, what y'all want? And if you ask a different African, you're going to get a different answer. But if we can clearly state our agenda, we need strong African American Democrats. We need strong African American Republicans. But we need for them to remember that they are African American and build their agendas and their movements off of that agenda, build what they do and their actions on each side of the aisle off of that. If we don't have an agenda, we don't have what it is that we need as a community and get as good as certain other groups at promoting that agenda, then we'll always be getting
even in the process of building these agendas and coming together, we have to also remember that God is first and God has the final say. We can pass, we can initiate policy and do all these referendums, but at the end of the day, God is going to have the final say. So we have to have a good balance of spirituality and action and policy. That's the only way that's going to work.
To that point, though, I will say, now, when I consider the narrative of Exodus, right, and I think about, the people crying out to God and then God raising up Moses in order to get them toward, emancipation, and then them experiencing that emancipation. And he says that, he is delivering them so that they can live in freedom for the sake of worshiping him, right? So the idea there is that under Pharaoh's leadership, Pharaoh was considered God, right? And so, in order for you to fully experience Yahweh, you have to be freed, right, from the tyranny
whatever
of
it is
like a
that's keeping you
foreign
down. Yes.
God. Now, when I consider America, for me, when I consider this, racism is the Pharaoh in America.
I
Okay,
see.
and so
Yes.
so to Elder Charles' point is that when we can deal with this issue of race in order to bring, because see, racism isn't just something that enslaves Black people in terms of
Enslaves
how,
white ones.
yeah,
Yes.
in terms of how we are bound from certain things, from certain positions.
Yes.
In 227 years of American history, we have only had, I think they said 3 African American senators on a federal level. Okay. Kamala Harris becoming the second African American woman. Okay, we're talking almost 250 years of existence. So we are still, the fact that we're still experiencing firsts.
Yes.
After all of this time suggests,
Well, that is because
right, that we're being held back. But white America is being held back too, because the idea of superiority and privilege is a prison.
Yeah.
It is a prison.
Well, racism is very institutionalized here. So it's it's not necessarily racism as it was in the old days, but it's built within societal norms and the way that things are brought up. And so we have to understand that it's not always just black and white, but there are other things to it.
I never thought I'd see the day that if I call out a statistic, I get called a racist.
Yeah.
Because I brought out this statistic about how many Black men are in prison.
So coming from where you stand from, there are many of us that we have black on black racism. We just had a Black president. And so there were a lot of Black people that said, hey, you know what? Obama really didn't do anything for me.
That's not racism. They might have a prejudice towards him.
Let me finish, but then you're called, like say, when they say that, they say, oh, you're a honky, or you're a sellout, and you don't agree.
Uncle Tom.
But then they say, okay, they point out, you have people in Chicago that point out, hey, this is a man that was from us, with us, came from us, we voted him in. A lot of Black people say, oh, we got you in, we did this, we did that, and then you didn't do nothing for us. You had a lot of Black people say that.
But when we do that, we're making it about race. Why can't we say as far as why can't we just why do African Americans expect him just because he's an African American leader to be the one to pass policies for Blacks? If we're gonna get rid of racism, we have to start thinking, we have to just eliminate color and we have to start seeing people as people
You can't
and issues as
eliminate
issues.
color before
Right.
racism is gone.
Right.
Like that. I mean, because at that point you're walking backwards, right? So you're attempting to live in a post-racial society that is no longer racist. I mean,
But if we expect
so-
him to do things just for Blacks, and aren't we just?
But I think
we're just.
There's still that
keeping
divide
it
in our
there.
community. I mean, nowadays, like you talk about with Dr. King, even with Malcolm X, all these things, those were leaders who had so many people underneath of them. Not everybody agreed with them, but there was like one voice, a united voice, kind of all together. Right now, with all the microphones, social media, there's a lot of different leaders on Twitter, there's a lot of different leaders on social media, and we're operating in different ways. There's some people that operate under this church or this, but it's just not having a unified vision of
Where I'm
mindset.
coming from is like you see the passion Brianna had and what she said. You see the passion from Precious.
Exactly.
There's a passion. There's two sides to it. We can't never come
That's
to
what
a
I
happy
mean, like
medium.
being divided.
And so we're
little
more
bit.
up to the point of saying, hey, this is how I feel, and then there's another side of Black to say, no, this is how I feel. And like you said,
Yeah,
we're
but I
divided.
think this is a very easy, like a better way of handling it. We're still understanding we're talking in the open session, out in the world, out in society. It's not that. It's not as receptive. It's like, no, I'm right, you're wrong, and this is why we're listening. We're not even listening. We're waiting to respond.
So I'll say this, and I'll point this question to the table. When are we as Black people going to come together and get it together?
Well, for me, I mean that question is so subjective. I mean, I feel like on some level we are together, right? And the problem is how do we mobilize our togetherness,
Exactly.
right? So you look at President Obama, and there are a lot of people, myself included, who had a very heavy critique of Obama's presidency. But I also will not do that without taking into account the fact that after he passed health care, most of the Democrats lost their seats, and he was trying to work within an entirely Republican Senate and a Republican House. So a lot of the stuff that he was trying to do, and Mitch McConnell made it very clear when he got on television and said, whatever President Obama tries to do, I'm going to be an obstructionist. So I mean, at that point, it's like, I mean, he could try to paint the sun gold, and
Right.
they would have been like,
plenty of the same
Just
things
like
that are
Trump could
going
kill
on now
somebody
are
and they be
going
like,
on
well,
then.
right.
You know,
So I am not ignorant to make a critique of President Obama without also understanding the limitations within his presidency when it came to policy concerning black people. Now, the reason why I have to go back to racism is because when I think about the policy concerning black people and them not allowing him to do certain things like push more money into HBCUs, push more money into education, the underlining agenda is race. So again, I say what I would love to live in a post-racial society. I would love to close my eyes and not be concerned about color. I don't want to be colorblind because I love the idea of color. I love learning about different cultures from Irish to South Africa. But at the same time, what I will not do is try to be post-racial in a society that is still racist. Again, it is walking backwards and you lose your footing. The goal that I think that we need to be pursuing is figuring out how to tackle the institutions of racism to bring them down so then we can rebuild. Now, that was the goal of Reconstruction. When Lincoln instituted Reconstruction, the purpose of Reconstruction was to completely restructure America. So for 11 years, from 1866 to 1877, they put black people in the Senate, they put black people in the House, we had black mayors in Florida, we had black sheriffs, all across the nation. When Lincoln was assassinated and his predecessor took office, he got rid of every executive order that he did and removed all of those black people, brought in the Jim Crow era, right, which set us back. After the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King gets assassinated. Same thing happens with all of the agendas that he had. They get rolled back. So we've gone through one dead Reconstruction to a second dead Reconstruction to now post-Obama a third dead Reconstruction. So the goal, if you really are paying attention to history, is to how do we sustainably reconstruct America? The only way to do that is to deal with these institutions: education, healthcare, or access to education, healthcare, and the job market, as well as leadership. Now, until we figure out how to do that and do it successfully,
I definitely agree.
we won't have.
So on one of the things you just hit on healthcare, and healthcare is a big divide right now because you have Obamacare, which helped out a lot of people, which at the same time is hurting a lot of people. Because say for instance, if you don't have health care, we make it available to you and the government get it for you. Mm-hmm. But if you do and you have a job, you basically, everything on your end has gone up and you have to pay for it. And so that's why you have a divide of, okay, hey, wait a second. Well, I don't want to take care of the...
That's almost a whole nother episode
Gotcha.
in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when Sister Precious laid out the health care, when she laid out the education, when she laid out the crime, when she laid out the financial literacy in our businesses, she really did lay out the urban initiatives that our bishop has instituted. Urban initiatives are, out of these issues, there's a program that each church could do on each one of these issues. We have each one of those programs here at the church. That is the forming of our agenda. If we speak about this is what we need here, we don't care. It's before we've had personality-oriented politics. The politician shows up, shakes our hand, they like us, they come to service, hey, that's great, yay, Republican, Democrat, we've taken pictures with them, they've all tried to get that picture with the bishop. However, when they leave and go here, they go do whatever it is that they want to do when they get back to their office. If we have an agenda, listen. What do you think about this, candidate so-and-so? What do you think about this, candidate C? What do you think about this? Well, this is how we feel about it. No matter who, particular one, it's as we start moving forward. And like I said, she just laid out the healthcare, she just laid out. We have to figure out and decide what it is that we want from the community. It will be bigger than any one congregation. It will be bigger than any one candidate. It will be bigger than any one leader. Even people who are not in our particular ethnic group will have to look and say, hey, I want that too in healthcare. I want that too in education. So now you have our clearly stated agenda gaining allies and gaining ground from other groups. And a post-racial society doesn't mean we ignore any racism, but paying respect to what we've been to in our past doesn't mean that we are consumed and so focused on it that we don't do anything else. It's being able to be properly minded and balanced to say, this is where we came from, this is what we've been through, this is what we want to make it to, this is how we navigate in these days and times, and an agenda that goes beyond all of the groups is something that I believe we can move towards.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Sister Rachel, we would love to have you back because there's a lot
Oh,
more
man.
to talk about on this
Absolutely.
subject.
Gotta keep it going.
Just invite me. I'll
There's
be
more to
here.
come. Well, thank you for joining us on The Well today. Catch us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. We'll catch you next time.